So what are boundaries and why do we even need them? Boundaries are limits we set to create a healthy sense of personal space. To sum it up, boundaries teach people what we expect of them and how to treat us. Now, boundaries can either be physical or they can be emotional. So an example of an emotional boundary would be to separate your emotions from another person's emotions. That may mean not accepting blame when someone's trying to place it on you. An example of a physical boundary would be physically setting something into place. So that may be taking a break from a toxic environment or separating yourself from a person that you know is unhealthy for you and your well-being. Relationships are extremely difficult to navigate in general, but when you're able to implement boundaries, they don't become as overwhelming or complicated as we like them to be. The reality is we all live in the same world, but we perceive our experiences and what's happening to us very different. So boundaries allow us to have our own space and to create meaning within the world that matters to us. And more importantly, allows us to feel safe with ourselves and around other people and in different environments. Boundaries are so important because they help us to take responsibility for our choices and our actions, but more importantly, they teach people how to treat us so that we're not taken advantage of or treated unfairly, which is ultimately what we all deserve and desire. So now the question is, how do you actually set boundaries? So the truth is, we are very intuitive by nature. But a lot of times we push that intuition to the side because it's not fun, it can be overwhelming, or we don't think it's real because we don't always see it right in front of us. And so the first step to setting your boundaries is to pay attention to that. Pay attention to what your body is telling you. Is there a certain person that you go around that causes anxiety or depression? Is there a certain place where you feel less than valuable or not appreciated? Pay attention to these feelings and these thoughts. Those are telltale signs that you need to be setting boundaries in regards to these things. So once you identify the people, places, or things that are triggering you, take some time to hone in and reflect on what you would like to change with that. So that goes to the second step. In a perfect world, if you could change anything about that experience, about that person, about that environment, what would it be? What would that look like? So when you're thinking about it, how can you take what you desire in a perfect world and actually implement that into your reality? So for example, if you are in a very toxic relationship and your significant other speaks to you and calls you out your name and says really nasty or negative things to you, in a perfect world, they would treat you like they would want to be treated. And so that is an example of a boundary that you would like to implement in your life that your body is telling you you need, and more importantly, you deserve. So now the third step to setting a boundary is to build up the courage that you're going to need to actually set that standard. So it's all fun and games to know what you want, to feel what you want, to think about it and to reflect on it. But when it comes time to actually implementing or setting the boundary, it can be overwhelming. The reality is we all know what boundaries are, and I believe deep down we know that they're beneficial, but many of us avoid setting boundaries because it's difficult, because it's not something that's familiar, and because we haven't seen it set successfully in the past. But you deserve better. And so you must be willing to take the next step and set that boundary. So what this may look like would be you going to your significant other and saying, I no longer am going to tolerate you calling me out my name. And so next time you do that, I'll walk away. I'll hang up. I'll leave this unhealthy relationship. It may be telling yourself, I'm not going to continue to go to this environment where I can tell I'm not wanted because I don't feel good there. The biggest thing that you need to understand is when you set these boundaries, you need to be consistent because you yourself will give pushback as well as other people. Because although we all know that boundaries are good for us, and although we understand what they are, they're not familiar. And so our natural response is to push back and to want to go back into the responses and the behaviors that are familiar. So recently I had a client of mine who was really working on her budget, saving some money, especially after her divorce. And so what she shared with her friends was she was not going to go to happy hour every single Friday. She agreed that she wanted to spend time with them, but she said that she'd like to do it one Friday a month. So every single Friday, her friends continued to call her because That was their routine. That was their pattern. And for some point of that time, she wanted to give in. She wanted to go to happy hour because that was her comfort zone. That was familiar. But then she remembered she set that boundary. And so when they started to call her and ask her, hey, we need to go to happy hour this week, she said, nope, it's the third Friday. Nope, it's the third Friday. The more consistent she was with that boundary, the less they gave her pushback. And the same goes for any boundaries you set with any person or with any environment or with any situation. In the beginning, you are going to get pushback and it's going to feel uncomfortable. But the more consistent you are and the better you communicate that boundary, the more effective it will be. The thing about boundaries is they, again, reflect what you're okay with. And so if you say, I'm not okay with friends who tell my business, but you continue to have friends who share all of your business, then you're setting that expectation and letting that other person think that it's okay for them to continue to do that. Ultimately, setting boundaries can be a difficult and overwhelming process, but the outcome is well worth it. I understand that many of us have never seen successful boundaries set in the past, but that's not an excuse for us to avoid setting boundaries for ourselves. If you desire peace, you desire happiness, and you desire to be treated fairly, boundaries are the key component to doing that. And the thing I want to highlight is that setting boundaries is not selfish like a lot of people would try to tell us. In fact, it is an imperative part of the process to self-care. It's the best thing that you can do for yourself as well as for the people around you by setting that example and setting that standard for what you will tolerate and what you will accept and what you expect. Boundaries are an essential aspect to your overall mental health and well-being. And so today, with this information that I shared, I challenge you to take some time to reflect on your life and consider what areas you need to begin implementing more boundaries. No excuses, no exceptions. It's time to get started. Make sure you hit like and subscribe. Follow me on social. And until next time, I'll chat with you guys later.